What if the life you are searching for is not absent, but quietly waiting for you to meet it with responsibility? What if resilience is not about enduring more pain, but about staying rooted in who you are as you rise toward love, truth, and alignment? Today's conversation is not about becoming someone new, it's about fully inhabiting who you already are. Welcome to the Divine Decode, a space where we explore the deeper patterns beneath our experiences and translate inner awareness into lived truth. I am Pragya, and today I am joined by Florence, who is a coach, author of Root to Rise, and founder of the Realization Hub and Catalyst Mastermind. Florence works with people who are deeply self aware yet feel a gap between their inner clarity and the life, love, or fulfillment they're actually living. In this conversation, we explore responsibility, resilience, and true love, not as lofty ideals, but as grounded, embodied practices that shape real change. And I've spoken a lot. I'm so sorry for that, but that is pretty much about her that I give you through. And let's find about her in what she has for us today. And welcome, Florence. Welcome to the show. It's such an honor to have you on board with us.
Thank you, Pragya. Very happy to be here with you today.
Florence, we're very glad that you're here today with us, and it's a pleasure having you. And yes, to start with, um, I've talked about what you do, what your work is, and your take on, insights, love, fulfillment, and all of that. So, before we speak about love or resilience, I want to start with something more foundational, which would create the base of it. So, many people, they gather insight, self awareness, even spiritual understanding, yet still feel stuck. Okay. So, they have everything. A lot of people are very self aware about what they are stepping into, what situation is around them, and what should they do. But then again, it is the constant feeling of being stuck and being there in that slump all again. So when did you first recognize that insight alone was not enough for you, and that personal responsibility was the bridge between understanding and transformation, and that even when you were stuck, what was that you did?
The huge realization that helped me tremendously to walk the best possible path I could is that wellness is the guide, wellness, well being. What I mean by that is that, like you said, we can collect great insights. We can also collect a lot of knowledge about spirituality, about fulfillment. We can also stack lots and lots of practices in our lives and have millions of rituals throughout our day that we attach ourselves to. But what it comes down to is whether we feel good or not. And last year, when I really came very close to experiencing another instance of burnout, thankfully, I had this realization that again, wellness is meant to be the central criteria, the marker against which we ought to navigate and find ourselves. So it's very simple. Whenever I notice overwhelm or irritation or frustration or stress creeping in, that is a sign that something disconnected. And I don't necessarily need more information or more practices, but it's really about coming back to this essential, natural, innate peace inside. And all this stress or overwhelm or frustration is saying to me is that in that moment, I have allowed my mental space to get a little polluted. It got a little bit busy. So that's been the big insight I've had is that I can always, all day long, consume content about spirituality, enlightenment, and greatness and leadership and whatnot. But if I am not rooted in a sincere well-being, in a sincere, genuine wellness, then I will inevitably find myself back to a place of overwhelm or stress or frustration.
That makes so much sense, and thank you for telling us your journey through it. And that's lovely, the perspective that you carry with it, and thank you for that, Florence. Now that you talk about self awareness, even spiritual understanding that you talked about, I want to know that responsibility, it often gets confused with pressure, blame, or self criticism sometimes, right? Because we hold ourselves responsible, and then we are like, oh, I think you're blaming yourself at that point, or anything that comes with it is just misconceived as that. But in your work, responsibility, it seems to function very differently, and I love that. So, what do we listeners and we in general fundamentally, misunderstand about responsibility when it comes to growth and love? So, what is your take on the misconception?
I think one individual who put it very well, very clearly is Stephen Covey in his very famous book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about how we can very easily feel consumed by confusion and by a need to control things and events around ourselves. And when we feel out of control, we then fall into a sense of powerlessness. And the antidote that he talks about to this is minimizing the circle of concern, all the things that we worry about, that we feel powerless over, or that we feel we need to have more control over. We minimize that circle of concern by expanding our circle of influence. And we expand that circle of influence by realizing what we can take responsibility for. So, if, for instance, we are working in a difficult environment, maybe we have less than good relationships with our coworkers, or there might be a lot of pressure to perform, to sell, to whatever is part of the job. The more we look for places that we can affect, the more we look for things that we can shift inside of us, that we can do and promote by leading by example, by doing things that are a little bit a step above, or that we simply take responsibility for by innovating and taking initiative. The more we are in that space of ownership, the more we're expanding our influence and the less we feel a need to control or feel a sense of powerlessness. We then effectively come to ground ourselves into a place of impact. We find ourselves very much so more involved and engaged with life. So I think a fairly easy example to relate to is regarding our health and wellness. It's very easy for us to blame the rhythm of life, the pressures of and demands of jobs and obligations with our families and such, to little by little let our ownership of life get eroded. We start eating less consciously. Maybe we shorten our nights, whatever those things might be. But as soon as we really take responsibility for our well-being, which is fundamental to accomplish anything, it's obvious that if we are running on fumes, if we're exhausted, tired, or malnourished, or sleep deprived, we can't perform adequately. So, by really taking ownership of all the bits and pieces that compose our wellness and be mindful of all the things that we can do in terms of self-care, the more we are capable of expanding our circle of influence. When I have energy, when I'm eating adequately, when I'm sleeping adequately, wherever I can, sometimes circumstances in life kind of stand in the way. But the more I look for all the possible places where I can do better, be better, the more I feel like I am a real player in the game rather than just being on the receiving end of what life has in store, you know?
That is so, so true. And it's beautiful, to say that, waiting for what life has in store for us, because you never know what comes up. And thank you again for, letting us know what responsibility is. And to the listeners, what I understand and what I take away is that, responsibility is not punishment, it's authorship. And that is beautiful. Thank you for that, because a lot of times we just misconceive so much, and then um, there is just this idea that we have that, okay, this term would mean so much burden on me, or so much, entitlement to it would have. But then again, it's authorship. So yeah, thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Um, Florence, you work with people who are thoughtful, reflective, and emotionally aware, which is wonderful to have people like this around you. But yet, what I believe that a lot of people, they feel unable to translate that awareness into change sometimes. They're very thoughtful, reflective, and there's so much wisdom in them, but then it's not translated. So when someone feels stuck between insight and action, what deeper patterns or fears are usually operating beneath the surface? Because that transition, or that translation is not that easy, I believe. And what is the deeper pattern which makes them feel stuck between insight and action? So yeah, what is your take?
Well, I found that there were three elements that are good to check out in life that helps us to bridge that gap, like you said, between the insight that we may have and actual impact, tangible result in the material world. Three places to look at would be: one, envision. The insight, the idea we may have could be vague. So, in an exercise of envisioning, we become as granular as possible, as accurate, high definition as possible. And especially, we get very clear as to what is truly resonating with us, because we can take on objectives that are not really ours. Maybe, for instance, uh, I think it's a fairly common thing for young people who are at a time where they're making choices for their future, for their career, to be influenced by their families, by their friends. Oh yeah, that would be a great career for you, or that's a sensible choice to make, that's a sensible path to take. But that might not really be something that they truly resonate with, that is deeply meaningful to them. So that's where, when we are in an exercise of envisioning, it matters to check in with ourselves. Is this something that pulled my heartstrings, or is it just an idea, a concept that looks pretty on paper, but that doesn't really relate to me? So that's the first thing, envisioning. Are we clear, and are we truly aligned with what's on our mind? The second piece is, what am I listening to? Am I listening to my head only, or am I listening also to my heart? Am I listening to that true self that is guiding me through intuition? Is it, or am I listening to, again, societal pressures? Am I listening for concepts and ideas that are theoretically good? So that listening part is what I find a really important place to explore. W- Is what I am listening to me, my true self, or am I listening to something that's just theoretical? And then the third piece that I find important to look at is how engaged am I with life? That third component is play. And that's where the rubber meets the road. When we have those great ideas, but we don't execute on them, nothing happens in the physical world. And I think that playfulness is key to make things happen and do so more so from an experimental approach to life than in um, that hard will that might just keep us on a not so good path, or that doesn't allow for flexibility and adaptability to new information. So again, it's very easy to get caught up into an idea of something, but unless we are flexible and willing to iterate and adapt, adjust, change, and morph, which playfulness allows for us to do. Because when we get caught up into something rigid, the playfulness of it just leaves. It's hard to be playful and to be rigid at the same time. Playfulness really invites flexibility and fluidity. So that's the third component that I find to be useful to look into is how engaged am I with the events of life? How am I playing my best game? Am I am I engaged in taking action, or am I stuck in paralysis by analysis? I think it's a very common thing for all of us. We get stuck in analysis paralysis, but that's where play really helps us to move away from stagnation and into a more dynamic relationship with life.
Yes, that is the reinforcement that the listeners were needing. Thank you so much for that.
Okay.
Now that we talked about patterns, we talked about responsibility, insight, action, and all of that. I want to know that romantic relationships they often mirror the places where responsibility is avoided or misunderstood in daily life. So, how does a lack of emotional responsibility or resilience tend to show up in intimate relationships, and how do they affect in the long term?
Yeah, in all relationships, there's maybe a tendency to see what other people are doing incorrectly, or things that they are doing that we don't like or that don't work for us. And I think very easily we fall into wanting to control other people, or fall prey to the idea that if only they did this way, or if only they changed how they acted or the way they expressed themselves, then everything would be wonderful and perfect. I find that, considering that we cannot control what other people do, think, or feel, coming back to what we can affect is a much better bet when it comes to improving our circumstances. So when we are looking at, well, what am I doing that is not working out at this time? How am I participating the in the decay or in the less than optimal aspect of the relationship? And that could be with an intimate partner, it could be with a friend, it could also be with a coworker, with our children, with our family members at large. It's important for us to look at, well, again, what can I take responsibility for? Maybe I'm not setting my boundaries properly. Maybe I don't have a standard as to what I want this relationship to look like, what I want to emulate as a result of our connection. So it is always a safe bet to come back to look at what it is that we are doing, that I am doing, that is less than optimal, and back to taking responsibility for what is not working. Now, other people are participating in the relationship, and it's important also to see that there are things that we cannot change in them, and for us to recognize if things are to stay that way. Is it is it acceptable for me to remain in this relationship, or does this relationship need to come to an end? So that clarity piece always comes in handy. And I truly see that when we are rooted into our responsibility for our part of the relationship, that's when we really connect to love. The more we are caught up into the ideas of what the relationship should be like, the moment we are stuck into the idea of what the other person should show up as, we are we are we are setting ourselves up for pain and suffering. The moment we are living from expectation in other people and how they are meant to make us feel, it's a very slippery slope that will only lead to confusion and mutual dissatisfaction. The more we are willing to show up for other people, and especially to be very rooted in true, our true self, what truly resonates with us and aligns with us, the better quality of the interaction can be, the better quality of connection we can experience.
Hmm, that is beautiful. And listeners, as you listen, where might life be inviting you to take deeper responsibility, not to judge yourself, but to align more honestly with who you are becoming, is something that you have to introspect on. And true love, whether for self or another, it emerges when responsibility and resilience meet at the root of who we are. And that is what I'm taking away from Florence today. And Florence, thank you for being on the show. It was such an honor hosting you today. And for listeners who feel called to explore Root to Rise, the Realization Hub, and your deeper work, let them, know where can they find you through this.
The easiest way is to go to my website. It's realizeunlimited.com.
Thank you for spending this time with us on the Divine Decode. If something resonated today, allow it to settle. Real transformation often begins as a quiet inner shift before it becomes visible. Until next time, stay rooted and rise with intention.